The Properties panel is really the hub of our workflow in Encore. It's probably the most important part of the entire Encore workflow. You see, the Properties panel is essentially like this chameleon that gives us feedback according to whatever we have selected. So if we have a button selected, it's going to give us the properties for that button. If we have a movie selected, it's going to give us the properties for that movie, etc., etc. Also, using the property panels, we can create links and navigation. Folks, we're going to be talking about some great stuff in this training series, but the Properties panel is probably the most important aspect of anything that we're going to be covering here. You've got to get this and not skip over it, and not to put any pressure on you as a student or anything, but this is a very important area of the program to grasp. Now, the next movie we're going to talk about is on the library panel, so I'm not going to talk too much about that here, but I do need a menu from here, so I'm going to click on this button on the left-hand side, which will show me only the menu objects. Next, I'm going to scroll down, again in the library panel, and click on the element menu one time. That will preview it here, make sure that's the one that I want. Now I'm going to double-click it. That will add it to my project, and you can see it here in my project panel, and it will open it up in the menu viewer here. Now we're also going to need a timeline. So what I'm going to do is right-click, select Import As, Timeline, and open up the Martian robot clip. So now we have our timeline and our movies in our project, but we're looking at the timeline. Now I want to go back to my menu. All I have to do is change the tab that I'm looking at from this monitor to this menu viewer. Now, if I click on the menu here in the project panel, and then I come over here to the properties panel, you'll see that I'm looking at the properties of the menu. Let's say I want to change its name. I could go over here to the name field and type warm toned menu. Hit enter. And now, even here from the drop-down, here in the project panel, it's all changed and updated. Notice how as well, if I click on one of these buttons, I am now adjusting the button here in the Properties panel. So again, you're getting a sense of looking right here to see what exactly you're adjusting here in the Properties panel before you fiddle with it. This is crucial, folks. Make sure you know what you're looking at before you just go and start adjusting links or other properties. It may appear, because our menu viewer is selected and because the menu looks kind of selected a little bit in the project panel, that this is the menu we're fiddling with here, but again, the Properties panel tells us otherwise. Click on the movie clip, and here it says that this is just a generic asset. We could also change the transcoding settings from here as well. So how do we create navigation from the Properties panel? So what I'm going to do first is click on this button here, and I want to link this button to the timeline. Now, it's very important. I do not want to link the menu to the timeline. I need to link the button to the timeline. So making sure that this button is selected and making sure that it says button in my Properties panel, I'm going to click what's called the pick whip, this little curly cue. Click and drag this over to my Martian robot timeline. So now, as you can see, it is linked to this Martian robot timeline. Another thing that the Properties panel does quite well, and that's very important, is setting end actions. Again, once something is done playing, where do users go? You have to specify that. Encore is not going to make any assumptions. So I'm going to click my timeline here, making sure it's selected in the Properties panel, and I can set an end action for this. So the end action is, again, what's going to happen once the timeline is done playing, once it reaches the end. And once it's done, I want it to go back to this menu. So I'm going to click and drag the pick whip to the menu. So now, as you can see in the Properties panel, our end action is set to the warm tone menu. So when people click on this first button, they're going to be taken to this timeline. And then once they're done watching the timeline, the end action, again, will bring them back to the menu. Another great feature of the Properties panel that's a little bit secretive is that if I click on nothing and I deselect everything here, then I get the options for the entire disk. This is really cool. From here, I could set things like first play. We talked about what that was at the beginning, but I'll repeat it here again. The first play element is the first thing that happens when viewers use their DVDs. On most Hollywood DVDs, you get that annoying FBI warning screen that you can't fast forward past to save your life. That is the first play object. In the project panel, it's denoted by this little yellow circle. But I actually do want this menu to be my first play, so I'm going to leave this as is. So that's the basics of how to use the Properties panel. Again, its importance cannot be overstated. Very good. So, all dramatics aside, next we're going to look at this great library panel. You see, there's tons and tons of freebies that ship with Encore. Tons of menus and buttons and backgrounds and all sorts of cool stuff, all available for free right here on your computer via the library panel. That's next.